I want to talk a little about um, Aquarius and Leo axis and the art of painting. And I'd like to talk about it as the discussion of the Saturnian dedication to um, the sciences of light. And as we enter, with an outer planet with a big move that's going to be of 2 decades, delving into the Aquarian archetype and uncovering the secrets. So if we take Pluto, that is the cellular, the core level, getting to the core of something. So this is excellent to begin to take on architecture self-studies, particularly self-studies, especially as Neptune will ingress into Aries. I believe we are going to have a generation of painters and architects. And I was wondering about, like, why am I looking into painting so much? So if you think about Leo, which is the polar opposite of the axis, it's a luminary, it's the sun. And very simply put, it is light. So the capturing of light into containing structure, which is Aquarius, and the anomalies of structure, which is how we explore both science with air learning, um, and color, patterns in color. Um, Sun is also Leo, is also the personal. Okay, if we go back to the Leo Pluto generation, that was going to the detail in the deep psychology of the person. I think once made, I did Diddler's chart with a technique by Yair Trubelsky, who's a Pluto Soul generation. And that technique is so invasive because you look at the sun and the moon and the upbringing and what it entails. So it's both humbling, but it's also incredibly invasive, um, as Pluto is. When it comes to the polar opposite, then it is not the going into the person, but actually going into the art of time and the art of light and bring in different textures from different times in history. And also, if you think about what is light, I think we are going to have an up jump in the way we describe light, and the connection between light and gravity. So the closest we had was kind of like the photon wave, the duality of light, which is more Neptunian in my opinion. But I think we are going to begin to describe light as the waves of gravity. And for the waves of gravity, um, capturing those waves in praxis is actually both filmmaking. If you think about, the camera, which is very interesting that the camera is an inverted image of what we see, and that actually a process that, as far as we know, is going through our eyes, and then there is a parts in the brain that do the interpretation, and they invert the picture for us. I think the art of inversion and inverting it back so that we can see clearly. When I think about, Saturn as Orthodox religion, and even Satan, right? So Satan is an inversion where, in order to see reality clearly, we need to re-invert it. And I guess that's why the Masonic and the Rosicrucians are being chased, both because, yeah, we expose, the things that we see, but to actually be able to see them, we need to re-invert the inversion, which is what happens when a giant planet like Pluto enters Aquarius, and then we're like, oh my God, that way that we've been looking at the world, the duality, the mercurial, the you have to be able to cause a disease, to cure a disease, you have to be able to kill a person in order to learn about life, and so on. That sciencey detached approach we also going to have streams of inverting the inversion. Or if I take a look at, hey, me looking at and curating wounds of MK Ultra satanic abuse is not done by me learning how to inflict these wounds and then to cure them, but actually me suffering these wounds and then inverting the inversion. And so, thank you. Yes, the plate. Thank you, Mama. And when it go back to the art of painting, so what is decomposed here is the fabric of time. We're going to look at not the beauty around history, but portraits and art technique around history. I think we're also going to have a booming of the various astrological arts across time. I was just looking at Diana asteroid, which is next to my natal ascendant, and I guess a lot of people who listen to me now is like, okay, that made the perfect sense. And it began by me looking at Diana, the Princess Diana, and she had an interview for Panorama. Okay, if you know, you know what the synchronicity is. If not, as I let it, you know. But the thing is that later I was looking at the asteroid, and there is the pre-Hellenistic view of Helena as fertility goddess, works with animals, forests, all the things I do in my life. Okay, but also there is the Hellenistic version where the female goddesses were kind of, let's say, it's a teeter-tatter, because before that people didn't know that the sperm has a role in fertility, so they were worshipping only the female, and then they were going for the other extreme. Okay, so we're demoting completely for the femininity, and then Diana became a goddess of the hunting, so she became huntress. Not only that, she became the goddess that helped people who were sexually violated by men. Okay. Okay, so if you think about, Pluto going into my 12th house with Saturn in my first, and me kind of looking at asteroid Diana, makes so much sense. But we're going to, even when we look at astrology and art, at painting and architecture, and even at masonry, we're going to see different phases. When did Satanism took over masonry? Was it from the beginning? Was it the Khazarians? What tribal arts were they inspired from? And that shifts of perspectives can help us to bring in a whole new world where we combine different times in history, because just, if we talk about goddess of fertility, so there's not just goddess of fertility, there's also god of fertility. But if we take it as Zeus, so Zeus was incestual, his wife was incest, right? So we might have new gods, new pantheons. And if I go back to the days of, Jung, then he also had placements. I recall Austin Coppock, he looked at Jung's chart. He had placements around the Aquarian Leo, and he looked at the pantheon and the archetypes as something that can facilitate healing, but he also went kind of like overboard with that and succumbed to that alongside with his patient, which he molested. And that story of like the god, the goddesses, the archetypes, and the birthing of science. So if you think about the archetypes, we might need a new pantheon to change for the or to curate the wounds of the many strings of consciousness that we created around our deities, or new ways to worship or work with deities. I think my example with the Beta Per Se talisman is very likely world innovative, more so than I figured, because she's the snake goddess that they sacrificed these children to. And I'm like, well, couldn't you tell me that? But still, it's kind of useful. Like, you don't need to sacrifice. Like she's not asking for these sacrifices. So we're going to be looking at different times in history and creating a conglomerate of times which reassesses to something that has more equity. So you think about the gods and goddesses, so god of fertility and goddess of fertility, the importance of this sperm and the importance of the egg. And with that, there's a different architecture, okay? If you think about the combination between the phallic shape of a door and the egg shape of the entrance, and that yin-yang combination that brings in structures that actually have sustenance. Whereas if the arc is too wide, then it's basically less, okay, it's holding, but it's not like we have a door that you can go through. We have the height, enough height, and then you have the arc, which is more like the yin shape, okay? And we need the flexibility and the sustenance, because you don't live in a sphere. In Netherlands, there was actually experiment to build sphere houses, and they turned out to be claustrophobic. Or if you think about the igloo and how the igloo shaped the Inuit culture and was shaped by it. So igloo was a structure we made in the snow, but when we go to other climates, we have more malleability to build structures that sustain a good equilibrium between whereas the sperm and the egg, or yin and yang, and that is regardless of what the genders, and have quality of life that is imbued in our structures, which I believe will turn to building with stone, okay? So to set, if you set that in stone, then that will hold for the next 1,000 years. And now we're talking at least the beginning of the ushering to golden ages, which is beyond a certain planet. It's an era, okay? It's not just an outer planet. Going back to the painting, to the working of light, if you think about structure, we think about having depth, and Pluto is having depth. We're not thinking just two-dimensional. We're thinking about sculpting and the sculpting art of painting and the creation of dimensions. If you think about painting itself, it's basically creating the third dimensional within the two-dimensional. So it's creating magic in itself. And the magic is in perspective. Again, the observation, the eye. And this one is not the emotional inner hidden of the moon and the Capricorn, okay? Which moon is also housing, but here we have architecture which has a cultural, which will eventually turn into housing, but has a cultural importance, okay? We care about the architecture of the building. If you think about the Leo friend that I have, then she would look at the architecture of cities, okay? It's from artistic point of view. It's like, does it look pretty on the eye? Does it blend well? And that completely renovated my thinking, because when it came to the city, I was seeing like a normal person. You know, I could see the beauty of mathematics, but when I walk around the city, I was like, everyday person just looking at this or that. If there would be a big, beautiful building, like if I would go in Europe, then yes. But you go in Tel Aviv, it's like, there's rain, there's fog, it's too humid or it's too cold, and you just look for something to eat. But we're going to have a completely different perspective and enjoy the observation of different aesthetics. So it's both to our structures, we can appreciate the magical craft, and this is a lot of yang energy, by the way. So we talk about air and fire axis, but we also have, it's an axis, the Scorpio and Taurus, which is the deep waters, the well waters, and the soil, which, Taurus accommodates, both Scorpio and Taurus are accommodating for the yin, although Scorpio is ruled by very young Mars, but the Venus of Taurus is, as a natural bearer of that Venus, is something that it returns us to the senses, to the experiences, but the very substantial material and the spirit in the matter. It's not for nothing that my channel is called the spirit of matter. And as my lot of spirit is in 22 degrees Taurus. So, yes, not sensual murder, please. Okay. And so we will have the access to that fixed yin Venus, but we still have a friction. And I think this is where the caveat is, because we are going to be looking at the persons, the royal, the light, and we're going to be looking at it and crafting, dedicating unusual materia, unusual structures, unusual way to comprise an image, the connection between the space that we are living in and everything. But if we forget the yin, we may lose that battle. Okay, if we may. Again, the golden ages will golden age, but it's just a question of how many executions on the way. And the tendency here is to oppose and denounce the regal, but at the same time nobly craft something new, which without the balance of the sensual, the pleasurable, we're basically doing nothing. Okay, if you think about the foundation of United States to escape slavery, and the notion that to be free, I have to be responsible for my life and make choices, and then United States turned into what would later be the inspiration to North Korea, because you have to stand in front of a flag and say, I am free, like a Masonic initiation, where you're basically enslaved. And there's a giant difference between the sense of dedication to what you are passionate about, to nature, to the arts, to the sciences, and those Masonic inverted rights. And just like the camera, we get a picture that's inverted, and our consciousness has to re-invert it back in order to see. And it takes an act of consciousness, okay, whether it's the camera, or we put the technology to invert, okay, or to and how do we develop? When we used to work with film, okay, we develop it from a negative, and from the negative we basically how we develop negative is basically we control the exposure to light. So think about the picture that develops in the dark, and think about the Pluto on this axis of the luminaries, and how we study the controlling of the sun. But there is a high importance to make this conscious effort of re-invert the inverted, so we don't end up with satanic structures set in stone, but rather remind ourselves that the very tending to the art is also the yin, and the very tending to the art requires rest, and our pictures requires rest to develop. And it's not about the control of light, but about the exploration of nature and the connection with the elements and the artistic arrangement of the elements that basically comprises the magic. And I think this, in a way, I guess my dabbling into astrological magic is rather new, but my approach to astrological magic is completely different than the alchemical, violent act of something set in stone to the alchemy of digestion, or the fire of digestion, and the emphasis is on the connection, and while the inscription on the stone is not seen as a violent act, okay, but rather as a capturing or a captivating inscription, okay, where we okay, and it's true, we use sharp tools and stuff like that, we use burning, so it's not to completely eliminate that, but the art or the alchemy is serving as tending to something that is already existing. So for me, when I tended, let's say, to Algol, or what people call the snake goddess, I wasn't trying to create horrors and rituals and sacrifices